Welcome to From Stuck to Scaled, Growth Strategies for Small and Mid-Sized Businesses, your guide to navigating growth, transformation, and success in today's ever-changing business landscape. Each week, we'll dive into proven strategies, real-world case studies, and actionable insights designed to help small and mid-sized business owners scale smart, lead stronger, and grow faster. Let's get you unstuck and on the path to sustainable, scalable success. Now your host, Julio Gonzalez.
Welcome back to From Stuck to Scaled. I'm your host, Julio Gonzalez. Starting a business is never easy, especially when you've got no funding, no safety net, and no clear playbook. But what happens when you find a mission so compelling and a group of people so in need that it fuels you to build something from nothing? Today's guest did exactly that, turning personal purpose into a thriving law practice that serves people at their most vulnerable moments. Mark Astor has been an attorney for over 30 years, starting out as a Palm Beach County prosecutor before founding multiple firms dedicated to helping individuals and families in crisis. From fighting wrongful detentions in Florida's mental health system to standing up for those battling substance abuse and mental illness, Mark has built his practice around one guiding principle: everyone deserves an advocate when the stakes are high. Mark, welcome to the show.
Julio, good to see you. Thank you for having me as your guest, and it's good to be here.
It's great to have you. So I've already told our listeners a little bit about you, but why don't you introduce yourself and tell us why you started your law firm?
So I am the co-founder of a law firm. It's Astor Simovich Law, where our home office or home base is Boca Raton, but we also have an office in Orlando, Florida, and we also have one in Boston. And the mission of the firm is to save families whose loved ones are suffering from substance use, mental health disorders, and failed attempts at recovery. So we are talking to mums and dads, mostly mums and dads. Occasionally it's siblings and spouses, but typically mums and dads call us from all over the country. And they have an adult child, 25 to 45, with a long history of drug use and mental illness and treatment that never seems to work. They're probably not taking their medications. They may well have had some involvement in the criminal justice system, maybe even an overdose or two. And the family comes to us and says, we're done. We've tried everything. We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we understand you might be able to help us. And that's what we do. We help them to solve that problem using a myriad of different tactics.
And what drove you to that? I mean, usually there's a family member or some situation that really gets you to that calling.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly was part of it. But my journey sort of started back in the mid-90s when I was a young prosecutor who was full of piss and vinegar and wanted to lock everybody up, until I started to see the same faces over and over again and realized there was something seriously wrong with our criminal justice system, because a lot of these folks were coming back repeatedly. And of course, they were getting punished worse every time they came back. And their actions, their alleged crimes, a lot of them were driven by substance use and mental illness. Now, the mandate even today here in Florida in our criminal system is to punish first and rehabilitate second, and it's been that way since I've been practicing law, and that's that's 31 years already. The difference was back in the 90s, we didn't have any way to sort of divert those folks out of the criminal system. Today we have drug court, mental health court, and veterans courts, amongst others. So we have a way to divert them. But, once you're in the criminal system, at some point, if you can't get your act together, they're going to lock you up. I mean, that's the way it is here in Florida. I was prosecutor for 5 years, didn't make a lot of money, but was really, from a professional point of view, very satisfied. I enjoyed the work tremendously. I left, I did defense work. I made a lot more money. I was miserable. I got married and divorced. And I tried for many years not to practice law. I really lost my passion for being a lawyer. I spent a year in DC getting a master's in law and also working on a presidential campaign because I had a bit of a passion for politics. I also spent 3 years in California in 2010 through 14, something like that. I took what I had left after the 08 crashed and just went out there and tripped the light fantastic. Took the bar out there twice, failed it twice. After 3 years, when I ran out of money, I had to come home. And I took the bar a third time and failed it a third time. So there was a bit of a kick in the ego for me. And then I met somebody literally by chance that completely changed the direction of my life. So I got a chance to see, I don't know if you've ever heard of R. John Robbins, but R. John Robbins is the founder of a company in Miami called How to Manage a Small Law Firm. And they teach lawyers from, solo and small law firm practitioners, the business side of being a lawyer, which is not something they teach us in law school. And I don't care where you went. If it was Nova, where I went in South Florida, or Harvard, they do not teach you anything about being an entrepreneur. And I saw him speak at a breakfast meeting, and I had an entrepreneurial father. My father left school at 14, my mother 16, and my father built businesses. That's how some of them were successful, some of them weren't. And so I sort of understood the idea of going to work and building a business and working hard. And after I saw him speak, and I basically begged him for a job, and I spent a year there working for him, learning about being an entrepreneurial lawyer. But at the very, very foundation of how to manage is that they are a personal growth company for lawyers. And they believe and they teach that financial growth must be preceded by personal growth. And I spent a year there, and I finally was ready to take 100% responsibility for my life, not just personally, but professionally. And I decided I was finally going to open up my own law office. As you pointed out, I had some close family members and friends who had these issues. So in February of 2016, I sat myself down in the local library here in Boca. I had no money to start a law firm. I was pretty much close to broke. But I just started calling people and meeting people for coffee. And I had the cheapest business cards I could possibly get made on Vistaprint. And I drove around to treatment centers and handed out my business card and said, "This is who I am, and this is who I'm trying to help." And it actually took 14 months before somebody called me with a substance use related case. So in the meantime, I took all different types of cases just to pay my bills. And 11 months in, I lost my father too. And I had just about enough money I found just about enough money to bury him and have the funeral done. So trying times for me. But, when the chips are really down, you find out if you have the grit to get back up. And I found out I had the grit to get back up. And so, every year the business has grown. I met my now wife the second year. And ironically, we went to law school together, although she was 2 years ahead of me, but our paths never crossed. We met at a networking event because she had an office in the same place that I had an office, which ironically we actually still have as our main base. And we started to work together. She's a far better lawyer than me. She's quite brilliant. And she had a background in guardianship. She had practiced up in Massachusetts for many years when she was having her children and married to husband number one. And I think what we discovered was you could take a statute that was really designed for elderly people and use it for the kinds of cases that we were handling. And it enabled us to give a family considerable control of what was an out of control situation. And so that is sort of, the sum and substance of how things started. And obviously over the last 9.5 years now, the business has really morphed, and we've hired staff, and we've had resources. And so it's been one hell of a roller coaster ride, but here I am talking to you. So the universe is amazing when you listen.
I want to touch on something that you said, which is a recurring theme in conversations that I have with entrepreneurs, that in law school, they don't teach you how to run a law practice. In most careers, they don't teach you the business of, that career. And now you have universities such as Nova that have degrees in entrepreneurship, which is really interesting. How did you, other than, or was it all this Arden Robbins that showed you how to run a business? I mean, because you had the influence from your father too.
Yeah, I mean, I never actually considered the practice of law as a business. I mean, they teach you black letter law. You go out there, you market yourself, you sell your wares, as it were, your services, and the phone rings, and you collect money, and you do the work. I never looked at it as a business. I never thought of it as a business. But when you boil it down, there's absolutely no difference between the business, And I'm not talking about the practice. I'm talking about the business of being a lawyer. There's no difference between that and a restaurant and a car dealership or a hotel. At the end of the day, you are selling something, whether it's cars, food, legal services, hotel rooms. You're still selling, and if you're and because you're still selling all those sort of things that go along with selling, like marketing and structuring the business so that the work gets done in an efficient manner, and that you give your clients / customers a great experience. They all apply. It doesn't really matter. It's just that obviously in the legal environment, we're also governed by rules of professional responsibility, which means we don't steal the client's money, and we do what we say we're going to do, and we file the case timely and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's just a business. But that was a novel idea to me at the time. Now, I sit and listen to lawyers who sort of babble on about how brilliant they are, and I'm like, yeah, but you're not making any money. And if you don't make any money, if you're sitting there with a client and they're trying to tell you about their problem, which is causing them to have sleepless nights, and in the back of your mind you're like, I can't pay my rent, or I can't make my car payment, then I don't think you're any good to anybody. So the idea that you can make money with this, I think is essential, because if you can't make money at it, how do you put food on the table for your family? How do you take care of your staff? And how do you really provide a world-class experience for your client? How do you provide really great legal services if all you're worried about is, how do I pay my electricity bill? You just simply can't. And so I don't think that the idea that this is a business should be foreign to the practice of law. It simply isn't.
And I tell parents and college students all the time, get whatever degree you want to get, but at least get a minor in business. I just had this conversation this week. Individual who I know, the daughter is going to be a graphical designer. Fantastic. Get a business degree somewhere along the line. Understand how to run the business, because, like you said, every business, every occupation, let's put it that way, is a business. You have to put yourself out there, market yourself, sell your services, and if you don't have, that education, you're going to struggle with it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I think the important piece that was missing for me was not really the money piece; it was the mission piece. Right, I didn't really have a purpose, which is why I was miserable. And I think once I discovered a purpose and a bunch of people that really needed help, that gave me the ability to create a mission and build a business with a set of core values around it. And I think once you do that, if you're driven by the mission and not necessarily the money comes.
Absolutely.
If you're driven by the money only, then you take no pride in what you do, and you're not focused on who you want to help, right? You'll start practicing door law. You'll take anything that walks in through the door. And I mean, that's not what we do. It's not what R. John Robbins teaches. And so we're very, very focused on what we do. So if a family law case comes in, right, somebody calls about a divorce, I'm not taking that case. I'm going to refer it to somebody that I know is really competent. If you've been arrested, I'm sending you to somebody else, right? I'm only going to accept cases. Number one, I think we could actually win the case and get a great result for the client. And if we can't, and it's not unusual to say, look, I'd love to help you, but I don't think you have enough evidence here, because at the end of the day, I still have to go and prove my case.
Sure.
We're not going to take that case because it's not fair to the client, and it's not fair to us, and it's not a way to build a business on a, take the money and run type of reputation. So we're really focused on the kinds of cases that we want, and frankly, at this point, the kinds of clients that we want too. Because I'm only going to work with people, frankly, that really want our help and are going to help us to help them. And occasionally that becomes an issue. So
with as many clients as you've helped in this space, what can you tell parents, things to look for, red signs? I mean, I'm sure you see a lot of recurring situations. How do you tell a parent, or what can you tell a parent that's starting to see things kind of taking a wrong turn?
Yeah, it's interesting. When my wife sort of tells me, she says, I've spoken to literally thousands of mums over the last 10 years. My wife accuses me of making them cry. I don't mean to make them cry, but when you have a very serious, no BS conversation, emotions can run high. And, when I ask mums, and mums, look, my mum is still around and she's 82, I'm 58. She knows if I'm having a bad day. I think there's a certain, and I have two amazing stepchildren, but my wife knows when the kids are having a bad day. There's a certain motherly intuition. And when I ask mums, how do you know there's a problem? They invariably tell me, I just know. But when you boil it down, what they notice, even subconsciously, is there's a change in behavior, right?
Yeah.
They can't hold down a job. They're not going to school. Their eating habits have changed. Their hygiene has changed, right? They're simply not bathing anymore. They're sleeping all day. They're up all night. The friends they hang around with have changed. They're burning through cash like there's no tomorrow. They may be even evidence in the house, right? They found drugs. They've seen their loved one using, these days, there's this legalized marijuana, this Delta-8 and Kratom, which you can buy at a gas station. I mean, just things, their behavior changes. They become aloof. They no longer want to talk to anybody in the family. They become very secretive. They become paranoid. They become delusional, right? I mean, all kinds of things, but there's just a general just change in their behavior. And some of it may be minor and some of it may be significant, but over time, like any disease, it just gets worse if it doesn't get treated. And so I tell families, be nosy about what's going on in your children's lives. And I'm talking about adults here. I mean, we do get calls about minors, individuals under 18, but typically we're dealing with 25 to 45 and occasionally older, but that's our typical age range. And you just know that there's something wrong, but be nosy, right? And I always tell families, be nosy, if only so you can gather the evidence we're going to need so that we can get into court and get you some authority to start making decisions for your loved one so you can make the decision to save them, because they can't make that decision because their brain's been kidnapped by this horrible behavioral health issue they're dealing with. I mean, it looks like your loved one, it sounds like them, but it ain't acting like them. And that's not what's running the show right now. There's a disease, in here, and it's got to be addressed. And the way to address that is to make sure that you, as the person that loves them the most, has that authority. Because if you don't, at some point, the state will probably step in and take care of this for you, either through the criminal justice system or the mental health system. One of the two, if they don't end up dead. And I don't mean to be blunt, but every year we lose somebody. And occasionally we lose more than one person. And that's not a fun call for me to get. It's devastating because, I mean, we're here to try and save people. And sometimes, for whatever reason, we don't. Or we speak to a family who delayed doing something and we speak to them 6 months later and they tell us, sorry, we lost them. Right. So be nosy, care, even at the risk of offending your loved one, find out what's going on in their life. And if things don't feel right, your instincts are probably right. They're probably not right. Something has happened and you should try to figure out what it is.
And how do you, or have you run into them? I'm sure you have. How do you deal with a situation where one parent is seeing the problem and the other parent is in denial?
God, that is such a great question, Julio. I'm so glad you asked that. Yeah, that is a problem. And I think it's really important to get, mom and dad, if it's mom and dad, get them on the same page, even if they're divorced. And occasionally we have that issue where mom is adamant there's something wrong. She's got all the evidence in the world. And dad says, no, I'm not doing it. There's nothing wrong with him. He's fine. He just needs a kick in the butt, or he needs this, or he needs that, or he needs a new Lexus, or he needs a new apartment, whatever it happens to be. There's nothing wrong with him. And that becomes a problem. And I will tell you, if we can't get both parents on the same page, it's unlikely that the case is going to go anywhere. Now, if mom wants to move forward unilaterally and do it on her own, that's fine. But I'm very cautious, and we'll tell the mom, look, don't be shocked if dad comes into court and hires a great lawyer to represent, your adult child to come in and fight this thing and says to the judge, sorry, there's nothing wrong here. He's perfectly okay, or she's perfectly okay. So that's a problem. And we really have to have a sit down, especially if mom and dad are obviously still married, is to get them on the same page. Otherwise you have this, and it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. We got to get everybody on the same page. And it may be the if it's the dad's in denial, right? And maybe there's some guilt going on because dad feels responsible for the fact, that for whatever reason, their adult child is having a problem. And, I think one of the things we have to try and reassure the family is, number one, this is a no judgment zone. We're not here to judge anybody. And number two, This isn't your fault. It just simply isn't. I mean, it's like saying, you know, look, I just lost my aunt. She had cancer about a year ago. Is it her husband's fault? She got cancer. I mean, really. I mean, it's not. Obviously, she's just got cancer. I mean, it's as simple as that. And he spent 2 years, you know, taking care of her. So you can't sit around and have do the blame game. It doesn't work. And sometimes families have to get past that and say, okay, whatever happened has happened, and let's move forward because there is light at the end of the tunnel. But if we don't do something, that light's going to slowly, you know, close off. So really important to get mom and dad on the same page. Critical.
And you mentioned the criminal law system and the mental health system. What tools, and obviously every case is different, but what tools are more effective kind of breaking the cycle? Is a Baker Act event something that kind of helps shock the system to get everybody on board? Is that just not helpful?
Yeah, so there's three basic statutes that we operate under here in Florida in my universe, and I'm not including the criminal stuff, which occasionally we veer into. I mean, I'm going to bring another lawyer in, but having spent 20 plus years in the system, I know how things work. So, but there are three basic civil statutes that we're operating under: the Marchman Act, guardianship, and the Baker Act, as you mentioned. So, Marchman Act is typically initiated by the parents if we're dealing with an adult child, and it is a statute that allows us to get the family the authority to place their loved one into treatment for periods of up to 90 days where there is a primary substance use disorder. Obviously, we need to be able to prove the substance use disorder, and there may or may not be co-occurring mental illness. We typically use guardianship, which, as I said, was really designed for elderly people, in cases where there may or may not be substance use. There is typically going to be severe mental illness. These days, that's primarily what we're dealing with, is mental illness cases. And we need a lot more control. I mean, significant control. So Marchman Act is great because it's a court order that says, Mark, you're going to treatment for up to 90 days. This is where you're going. And if you don't successfully complete the treatment, well, then I guess we're going back to see the judge to decide what kind of, sanction the court could impose upon you, potentially some jail time, because you violated the court order. But now I have access to some funds. Maybe I'm a trust fund baby. Maybe I have an income. Maybe I'm going to get on a plane and run to Mexico. And if you think that can't happen, it can, because we dealt with a case like that where the client was the lawyer and didn't listen. We got her back, but that's beside the point, right? Where I'm not taking my medications. So if we file for guardianship, that really gives us significant control. The family can now start making medical decisions, i.e., you will go to treatment. You'll take your meds. You won't, you're going to be living here. You won't spend time with these people. We're going to take your driver's license away because we can't have you driving high or drunk. And we're going to restrict your ability to get on a plane. So it gives significant control as opposed to the Marchman Act, which doesn't give as much control. But the Marchman Act is useful because it can be done very, very quickly. One's a sports car, one's a pickup truck. They both get you from A to B, but they have very different tasks, right? The sports car will get you there a bit quicker, but I could tow a boat with a pickup truck. So they have different uses. And then the Baker Act, which has become a real mission of mine, and I'll share that story with you in a second, is not a treatment statute. Okay, it is a statute that allows the state of Florida to basically grab you and take custody of you and make you a temporary ward of the state of Florida. Basically, in effect, the state steps in and terminates your right to make decisions for yourself regarding your medical and mental health decisions. It also, if, for instance, mom and dad have a healthcare proxy, it also terminates that effectively. So nobody can make decisions for you except the state of Florida. And unfortunately, one thing that is definitely true is that the mental health system here in Florida is draconian and broken. So as I mentioned to you, I lost my dad 11 years ago, and 2 days after, we buried him, I had somebody in my family that had a complete mental health breakdown. And that's really what Baker Act's for. It's designed for somebody who's in need of immediate mental health services to the point where perhaps they're suicidal and we need to pick up the phone and call 911. And I was there when the whole thing went down with paramedics and cops, and it was a nightmare. But during COVID, people couldn't get in to see their doctors and clinicians, and They started showing up at emergency rooms and calling 211 and 911 and all kinds of crazy stuff. And they got sucked into Florida's mental health system through the Baker Act, and they couldn't get out. And I would say that I'm comfortable saying I probably file more cases in the state of Florida against the state to get people out of the Baker Act than perhaps any other lawyer. I file over 100 cases every year to get people out of the Baker Act. So very useful when it's done right, very easily abused because it's extremely easy to circumvent the minimal due process that's built into the system. And by the way, once you're Baker Acted, nobody actually knows you're there. There's zero oversight. And the icing on the cake is because this facility, albeit private in nature and for profit, because they are a licensed agent of the state's mental health system, you can't sue them for this. They enjoy sovereign immunity. So absent you getting physically damaged, and I had a client that was sexually assaulted and another one that was beaten up. Other than those types of things, unfortunately happening, because they do have a duty to keep you safe, you're not getting your money and not getting any money for this either. And I can't tell you, I get 2 or 3 calls every day from people whose rights were violated. They were illegally detained. A neighbor called the cops because there was an argument and the police came down and Baker Acted them. They lost their job. I mean, their reputation was damaged permanently. It's horrendous what this thing does, and there's nothing I can do about it after the fact. And so the Baker Act has become a bit of a thorn in my side, but it's also become a bit of a passion of mine because I love fighting these things. But when it's done right, it can save lives. So I don't want to completely poo-poo the Baker Act, but if it's done right, it's great. If it's not, and it's easily to do it wrong, you find yourself in serious hot water.
So, point of clarification, because you said something that about getting people out. On the street, let's say Baker Act is kind of known as a 72-hour hold. Is there more to the Baker Act than what is commonly discussed?
Yeah, so I think what's not known, or people don't commonly know, is there's actually 2 types of Baker Act here in Florida. Both of them get you detained and locked up and can get you forcibly medicated. There's the involuntary Baker Act, which has an initial detention period of up to 72 hours. So the 72 hours is not the end, it's the beginning. And that can get extended with a court order anywhere from 0 to 6 months. So that's the involuntary Baker Act. There's also the voluntary Baker Act. How does that happen? Well, somebody goes in looking for help, or they're already there, and they either get coerced into signing what's known as a voluntary admission agreement, or they get tricked or lied to. But long story short is they sign what's known as a voluntary admission agreement, which gives the facility the legal authority to hold the person indefinitely without any kind of court order. Folks say, well, it's voluntary. What happens if I say I want to leave? You're probably not going anywhere. And the reason is because even though you are there voluntarily and supposedly gave informed consent, the facility has 24 hours to either let you go or they can file to keep you. And once they file, there's going to be a hearing somewhere in the next 5 days. And at that hearing, they're going to decide how much longer you're going to get stuck there for. Again, anywhere from 0 to 6 months. And folks don't seem to realize that. They say, oh, it's only 72 hours. Yeah, I don't know so much. If you went in there and you had health insurance, it's probably going to be a whole lot longer than 72 hours. Does that mean that everybody gets help past 72 hours? Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And I think the statistics are that over 100,000 people every year get Baker Acted in the state of Florida. And a significant portion of those folks don't get let go so quickly and shouldn't be there. So, it's a problem here. So I tell folks, when they call us, well, I want to Baker Act my loved one. Why? Well, they need treatment. Then don't Baker Act them because they ain't getting any treatment there. It's not what it's intended for. Let's talk about other options like Marchman Act and guardianship. And if there's an immediate need for services, pick up the phone and call 911 and hope that the cops come over there and do their job. But you can't just leave them there. You have to follow up with something because one of 2 things are going to happen. Either they're going to get stuck. They're not going to get any better if that happens, or they're going to get out. Well, they're not going to get any better if that happens. So it's a Band-Aid at best. At worst, it's a nightmare.
Question for you. We're talking mental health, substance abuse. What about the elderly. And what specifically comes to mind, my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's patients tend to go through a violent period, and my dad passed away several years ago, so this is all in the past. But he supposedly got Baker acted, and I say supposedly because his wife at the time, we couldn't trust anything. We found out after the fact that this supposedly had happened, and were never able to truly validate. But that was one of the stories that she provided. What do you see around Alzheimer's, or do you see anything around Alzheimer's and some of these same, the Marchman and Baker Act and so forth?
Yeah, ironically, last year, right before Thanksgiving, I had a call from an attorney, an old friend of mine, his father, who sounds like he was similarly situated to your father, who had Alzheimer's, and he also had various medical conditions and had gone into a local hospital. And this particular hospital I've litigated against many times, to the point where I've actually become good friends with the chief psychiatrist. It's almost become a bit of a running joke how many times he's Baker acted, folks. He happens to be a really good guy. He just likes to Baker people. But in any event, this lawyer's father went in there for medical issues and said to one of the nurses, "I don't want to live like this anymore." Well, those were the magic words, and he got Baker acted. And the lawyer called me and said, "Look, it's the night, it's the night before Thanksgiving. If we don't get him out, he's going to die there." So, long story short is I was able to get a court order to get him released. And I think because he was a lawyer, we were able to get the clerk and the judge to stick around just long enough to review my petition and get a court order out. And for that, we're eternally grateful. But the bottom line here was that things like Alzheimer's, things that like traumatic brain injuries, developmental disabilities like autism, things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are specifically excluded under the Baker Act, as are substance use disorders. Any type of brain disorder is excluded. Now, obviously, the hospital was hanging their hat on the fact that he said he didn't want to live like that anymore, and I don't doubt that he didn't. And I learned recently that unfortunately he passed about a month after the release. But a Baker Act facility is not a place for somebody like that. Now, having had, with my own father, having seen him mentally deteriorate, and fortunately, we didn't have to deal with the issues quite like you did. But ultimately, had we needed to, the remedy would have been really to file for guardianship over him, to basically step into his shoes and start making decisions for him, specifically about his medical care. Now, what we would have done with the guardianship is a different story. I mean, we would have had to obviously find somewhere to place him that could take care of him. But the long and short is that you need to be able to get the authority to make decisions for somebody like that. Now, I get it. He's got Alzheimer's, but until the court says, look, he does not have the capacity to make decisions that are in his own, best interests, he gets to decide how he wants to live his life. And so, that's why, the guardianship is such a wonderful and powerful tool. We just had a case this morning where we literally got retained on a case last night. And this came because the family had been dealing with another law firm who said, no, we can't help you, and all this other mumbo jumbo. And of course, they'd never handled the case, a behavioral health case. And this was somebody who was very similar to actually how you're describing with your dad and my dad. And they needed immediate authority. And we filed it. I think we had a court order within 3 hours, which is, I hate to even share the story because that's ridiculously quick and it doesn't happen all that often when you get a judge who really jumps on things. But so thank you to the judge in that particular county for doing the right thing and moving so quickly. But the point is that guardianship is a wonderful, powerful tool. It really can give you control of a very out of control situation and give you the ability to start making decisions for somebody who simply can't make them for themselves, whether they have a Alzheimer's or they have a serious drug issue or there's serious mental illness going on. You have to get control of that situation, because ultimately what will happen is the state will step in. It only takes one phone call, and the next thing you know, the police are coming down and that person's getting taken to, on a gurney to a hospital and then to a behavioral health facility. And I'm telling you, the state of Florida just really sucks at taking care of people, in the mental health world. They're just terrible. I love living here, but I wouldn't want to get stuck in the Baker Act. I'll tell you that.
I'm sure that these families would much rather not have to deal with you. What is the alternative, though? Are there sufficient, and I know the answer, so it's a bit rhetorical.
Mhm.
Are there sufficient resources out there for parents, for families to get the information that they need to help their loved ones? Where can they go?
Yeah. So, one of the things that has been really important to me, especially the last couple of years, is to make sure families can get as much information as they need and get it for free. Like they shouldn't have to call and spend money on a lawyer just to get the information they need. Now, obviously, if you decide to hire our firm, I mean, this is how I put food on the table for my family, by selling my legal services and my expertise. But if you, there are, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of videos all about this stuff. It's all over social media. There's also, I've got two websites. There are ebooks that you can download for free on both of the websites. And actually, if you call my office, you can speak to, I've got three people in our intake department. Nate, who's our intake manager, and Brittany and Justin, and you can speak to them for free, and just have sort of an honest, face-to-face chat with those folks about what options may or may not be available to a family. And it's a confidential conversation. And if ultimately you decide you want a little legal advice, we can schedule you for a paid consult with one of the lawyers, and if you hire us, we give you the credit. So it's basically free legal advice, as long as you're going to hire us afterwards. But there's so much you can get for free. And I tell families, listen, don't waste time with Google, because there's a lot of garbage out there, or even ChatGPT. And I'm a big fan of that, of AI, but it can give the wrong information. If you want to know how the law works in the real world, based on, at this point, speaking to thousands of families and filing hundreds of cases, actually, I think we're into the thousands now at this point. I mean, you can have that, and you don't have to pay me for it. It's there.
What about resources like, I think it's 988, that I'm not sure if it got shut down, it's being shut down, but 211, I think nationwide, handles some of that type of assistance. I was on the board of directors of Switchboard of Miami, which was the local 211, and they were part of the National Suicide Prevention Hotline Network, answering calls. How effective are those? Do you partner with those? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things I did when I first started out is we got an invite to go and see the inner workings of the local 211 here in West Palm, and very inspirational. Those folks are lifesavers. But yeah, I mean, look, 211 is a good resource for somebody who's in immediate need of crisis. What I have seen sometimes, though, which is a little concerning, is somebody calls 211, and the next thing you know, cops and paramedics are showing up, or somebody from a Baker Act receiving facility is showing up and looking to lock the person down, and that's a little bit concerning. But I think if you need help, I think 211 is a good place to start. Another good resource is NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness. I think the first year I was open for business, I went and gave a little, free speech at a local NAMI. There was probably 10 or 15 people in the room, and it was just a way for me to meet folks, but for them to hear about what we were doing. And obviously at the time we were, but a fledgling law firm, just sort of getting our feet wet. But those are great places too. So there are resources out there, and I think you mentioned, is it the National Suicidal?
Through the National Suicide Prevention Hotline.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a good friend of mine who lost a daughter and a niece to suicide, and shout out to my good friend Alan Mednick, who's making a big difference. He's very involved with that organization, and that's a great place. And look, at the end of the day, if you just need a resource, if you call my office, I mean, we'll put you in contact with everybody that we know. I mean, you don't have to pay me for it. I mean, we make these relationships so that you can get what you need. And if you decide, at the end of the day, you're only paying us if you decide you want to hire us to do legal work. If you just need help and a resource, I mean, call us. I'll give it to you for free. I think what I would tell folks, a couple things. Number one, and I tell this to every family that I speak to, I do not have a magic wand. And if I do, and I happen to wave it, it's going to take about a year. It takes about a year. The recovery journey is about a year. And the way it sort of works is that we typically work with a client. The minimum we'll take a retainer is for 90 days, unless there's an exceptional reason for it. But typically we're working on a case for anywhere to 3 to 6 months and sometimes longer. And the goal here is to get somebody into treatment, keep them there for 3 to 6 months, and then have them work some type of what I call continuum of care. What does that look like? Well, it means maybe they go to they're living in a recovery residence. Maybe they're starting to work again. They become med compliant. They get a sponsor. They go to AA. They go to their meetings. They continue with some type of outpatient therapy. In other words, they continue to work on their recovery, perhaps not in such a structured environment, but we have to give them the support, right? So they can continue to work on recovery. And if they can get to 1 year, they're more likely than not to be able to maintain recovery. And that doesn't mean to say they stop doing what they were doing, because I'm going to tell you, I've got friends in recovery 15, 20 years, and without exception, they go to at least one meeting every single week. That's just the way it is. It's like, you get up and brush your teeth. You get up and go to the gym. Well, once a week, I'm going to a meeting. And that's what they do to maintain their recovery. But they're also there so they can give support to folks that haven't been in recovery for 15 or 20 years. Maybe they've only been in recovery for 15 or 20 weeks. And so it's a whole recovery community. But that's what real recovery looks like. And anybody who tells you otherwise is just, is blowing smoke up your proverbial backside. It just doesn't happen like that, except in movies. And I'm very brutally honest with families. That's what it looks like. And that's what it takes. You don't have to hire us for a year, but you've got to expect this to take a year. It just does. I mean, someone's been sick for 5 or 10 years. You're not fixing that in 30 days. It just doesn't happen. But, as my old mentor, Roger Roberts, used to say, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I am telling you it's going to be worth it. And you can bring people back. The sooner you do it, obviously, the easier it is. But people can be saved, and they do get into recovery, and they do stay in recovery. So that's what I would tell families.
So, Mark, your practice, I think, is pretty unique. I don't know that I've ever run into another attorney that works on mental health and substance abuse and everything around that. So talk to us a little bit about your growth. You told us you started you were pretty much broke when you started. How have you grown? How are you looking to continue to grow? What are some of the challenges around that?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest challenge of all, Julio, is just getting the word out that there is an option here. It's a bit like the forest, the tree that falls in the forest. If no one's there to see it fall, did it even fall? So, I spend a lot of time, fortunately, the first 7 years was just me and my wife doing everything: sales, marketing, meeting with the clients, drafting the pleadings, running to court. I mean, we worked 8 days a week, 25 hours a day. You get the picture. We've only been blessed enough to have staff the last 2.5 years, right? So I have 2 associates. I don't have to run to court anymore. I have case managers, and I have an intake department. So I can be freed to basically do what I love to do, which is to share our mission. And so I spend the bulk of my time doing that. I get to talk to folks like you. I also put out, since we're done here, I'm actually going to do a training with my staff. And then I'm going to, I'll put a video out for today. But God, I also the last year, I became a Florida bar approved continuing legal education provider. So I can now give credit for a continuing legal education, which the lawyers need. The credit I give actually is based on substance use and mental health, which we need now. And so I get to go out and share my message with other lawyers, which gives them the credit, and it helps me to market my business. But, they say that lawyers are twice as likely to develop a substance use disorder as are non-lawyers. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think the profession attracts individuals who, for whatever reason, feel the need to be validated and get their love from clients who tell them how brilliant they are and how wonderful they are. And, well, you just saved me, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't get love from your clients, right? You just simply don't. And the other thing is, just the very nature of what we do. It's stressful. Clients, want everything done yesterday. And if for some reason you don't win the case, then you're no darn good. So why should you be paid? And I'm going to tell you, we win 9 out of 10 cases, but every once in a while, we don't win a case. Well, maybe we don't have enough evidence. Maybe, a witness took the stand and didn't testify as to the facts they had told us when we were first hired on the case. Or maybe the judge is just having a bad day. And that happens too. I mean, you can't remove the human element from these proceedings.
Right.
These are some of the challenges that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And that is the nature of the beast. But I try to get out there and especially with the lawyers, I say, look, this is what I do. Do you need help? And so it's become a bit of a mission of mine to try and help lawyers. I've put a number of lawyers in treatment. I've had calls from lawyers whose family members needed help. And so, we've got this little thing going with the Florida Bar where we help them. Because the Florida Bar, I will tell you, to their wonderful credit, is really, really good at helping lawyers who have issues. They're also really, really good at disbarring lawyers who have issues and then touch their trust account. That will get you disbarred 10 times out of 10. And it doesn't matter what the reason was. You're getting disbarred. And so every group I speak to of lawyers, I say, listen, if you only take one thing away from what we just talked about, it's that if you have a problem, I can help you to get help. I can connect you with the folks at the Florida Bar that you need to speak to so that you can save your ticket and save your life. Because if you don't, bad things happen. And so, I mean, it's just some of the ways I try to get out there and spread the love a little bit. And, I met my wife, as I told you, the second year. We got married 18 months ago. I have 2 amazing stepchildren. And so, my life has come full circle, because 12 years ago, I had nothing going on, either professionally or personally. I was no good to nobody. I was no good to any clients. I was no good to anybody that I might even consider having an intimate relationship with. And there I was, 48, 49 years old or whatever it was, late 40s, and I had nothing to show for it. Zero. I guess I'm in recovery too.
So, Mark, as you know, no one leaves the show without providing a couple of actionable tips that our listeners can implement today. So what tips do you have for our listeners and their businesses?
So I guess that there's a couple of things. Number one, find a group of people that need your help. And really drill down on who that is. Really think about who are you trying to help, because you can't help everybody. You also can't market to everybody. So find a group of folks that need your help and really make an effort to figure out how do you get to those folks so that they realize there's a solution to their problem. The other thing is it really is about grit. And when I first started out, I had a couple of lawyers who were a couple years ahead of me who really became strong support systems for me. One of them was a family lawyer, and she told me stories that when she opened up a practice and she couldn't pay her rent, and how she really had to buckle down and figure out ways to get it done. And 3 years down the road, she was very successful. And I called her and I said, "What do I do? I can't pay my rent." And she said, "Find a bunch of people that need your help and go after them. Find other people that know the folks that need your help. Who in your industry might know folks? Is it interventionists? Is it clinicians? Is it treatment centers? If it is, go out there and meet them and say, look, I can help these patients. I can help these clients. Here I am. And so it takes a certain amount of grit to do that. Okay. Because there are days, and even now I'm like, oh, I get frustrated, and maybe it's because I get overwhelmed sometimes, or maybe it's because, we had a day where where a case didn't come in, or maybe, whatever it was, right? I get frustrated and I say, why am I even doing this? And then I think about where I was 10 years ago and say, this is why I'm doing it, right? So you got to have a certain amount of resilience, because there are going to be days where you don't feel like getting out of bed. I don't know if you know who Alexander Usyk is. He's the current undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Before that, he was the undisputed cruiserweight champion of the world. And so I saw a recent interview with him. It really hit home. And they said to him, Alexander, how do you stay motivated? He says, I don't have any motivation. And there was sort of this pregnant pause, and the reporter said, well, what do you have? He said, I have something much better than that. I have discipline. He says, because motivation is here today and gone tomorrow. But when you have discipline, you don't need motivation. He's like, every day, especially when I'm preparing for a fight, I know I'm going to get up at 5, go for my run, come back, have breakfast, go into the gym, spar 12 rounds, go in, have lunch, take a nap, and then come back and do some strength and conditioning. And I don't need motivation. It's just happening. And that, he said, takes discipline. It's written in stone. It's not negotiable. It just gets done. And that's the end of it, even when he's not motivated. And I think, by the way, this is a highly motivated individual, but he really talked about the difference between discipline and motivation. And so, yeah, there are days where I don't feel so motivated for whatever reason. But I have discipline, because if I don't get up and do it, it's not happening. The phone's not going to ring. The work's not going to get done. And that really rang home with me. And so, yeah, I know that if the phone's not ringing as much as I'd like it to do, either I'm doing something wrong or there's just something I'm not doing at all. Maybe I'm not making enough calls to people. Maybe I'm not having enough lunches, or whatever it happens to be, right? You just have to have grit and discipline and keep moving forward. And as Winston Churchill once said, if you're going through hell, keep going.
I love that distinction between discipline and motivation, because it's 1,000% spot on. We can lose our motivation in a heartbeat, but as long as we maintain the discipline, we can continue making forward motion.
That's what it's all about. And do you like the Rocky movies? I think there's a scene in the Rocky, is it Rocky IV, where they're outside of the restaurant, and the son is saying to him, "Please don't take this fight, Dad. Every time I get ahead, I get reminded that I'm Rocky's son." And Rocky gives him this lecture, and he talks to him about, being his own man, and how, if you let it, life will put you on your butt. And he said, life's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. Yeah, that's how winning's done. And yeah, I mean, I know it's a movie, but it's a bit of a metaphor for Stallone's life, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. That's how winning is done. Because you're going to get put on your butt. You're going to lose cases. You're going to lose clients, right? You're going to have good days and bad days. But you got to keep moving forward. And as long as the good days outnumber the bad, you're doing something right. As long as you're making more right decisions than wrong decisions, you're going to win. I mean, what do they say about what's Michael Jordan? He said he missed 50% of the shots of every shot he ever took and still came away like arguably the greatest player ever to play the game. So if Michael can miss it 50% of the time, I don't know. I think we're all in good shape.
Yeah, I believe so.
Keep moving forward.
Mark, thank you for sharing how finding a mission and the people who needed you most completely changed the trajectory of your career and your life. Your story is a reminder that when business is built on purpose, it's not just about growth, it's about impact. Think about the people you're here to serve. Mark's mission is clear: saving families when their loved ones are suffering from substance use, mental health disorders, and failed attempts at recovery. When you anchor your work in that kind of clarity, scaling becomes a byproduct of the difference you make. Thanks for tuning in to From Stuck to Scaled. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who may need help finding their mission. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to From Stuck to Scaled, growth strategies for small and mid-sized businesses, produced by Optocution LLC. For more information, tools, and resources, check out our website www.redefinepossible.co/podcast.